to thank a few people that have made this responsible this whole evening. So for our adult faith formation team, they are the ones who helped me organize this whole event and also did all the hard work in the kitchen, and our hospitality team was greeting people, and so without them, I would have been not in good shape. So thank you very much for all your guys' help. I also wanted to thank all the representatives from the different agencies that were able to be here tonight and provide information about the services that they provide in our community. And a special thank you to Gary up there in the sound booth, who is doing sound and tech for us tonight. And then also, just thank you all for being here. Now, tonight we have Scott Geiselhart, who is here to speak. And I am so happy. We've been trying to get him scheduled with us for, over a year or two. And when he called me a couple months ago and said that this month would work out, I was very happy about that. So I'm glad it all worked out. And we want to thank Scott for being here tonight. I'm going to let him talk about his story. It is an amazing story that he has to share with us tonight. I hope that you all enjoy it. I'm sure you will. And again, thank you for being here. And now let me present, or help me welcome Scott Geiselhart.
Thank you. My name is Scott Geiselhart, and I'm going to be talking about a topic tonight that might have some triggers in it. I'm going to be talking about suicide. I'm going to be talking about addiction. I'm going to be talking about my experiences with PTSD. At any time, if anybody feels uncomfortable, please feel free. It's okay to leave. If you feel triggered, if you want to go stand in the back, we do have people here that might come and check on you, which, they're just going to be checking on you. I was a firefighter in Frazee, Minnesota for 24 years. But prior to that, I grew up in Detroit Lakes here. My parents used to own the Capri Motel, the yellow motel down across from the city park. So growing up in a motel that's right next to the main strip of Detroit Lakes was quite the experience. I had to work hard. My parents, I didn't have no free ride. I was emptying garbages. When I first started walking, that was my job, emptying garbages in the hotel rooms. And then I moved up to making beds and cleaning toilets. So I loved it. My parents did a really good job, I feel, of raising me. The best part about it was at 1 o'clock, when all the rooms were cleaned, I could go to the beach. So it was nice. It was a lot of fun. My dad was 50 years old when I was born. And that's also something that I think is really interesting or important as I talk about what I went through in life. And how at 50 years old, I kind of thought, he's up there in age. People, referred to him as my grandpa. And I never really got too close to my dad. I kind of pushed him off and had like a wall there between us because I always felt he was dying. He had gout, he had some other things. He ended up living until 80 years old. So for 30 years, I didn't really get too close to him. We didn't have that relationship I really wanted with a dad, and I'm sure he wanted more of a relationship with me, but I kind of pushed him away because I seen death. My first job was at Kittyland. If you know what Kittyland was, that was awesome because I didn't have to clean toilets. But as I grew up, graduated from town here, I was confirmed in this church, had our graduation party right downstairs in the lunchroom you guys were in. So this is exciting for me to be here speaking in the church I grew up in. I got older, and I ended up moving to Frazee in '94. And I was a mechanic at Nearson's at the same time. And one day, one of the salesmen came in and said, "Hey, here's an application for the fire department." And I'm like, "What's that?" I never thought about being a firefighter before. But I realized when I moved to a small town, I was also fresh meat. Man, we got to get this guy to volunteer for stuff. And I did. So a couple days later, he came back and said, "Congratulations, you're on the fire department." Okay. Next thing you know, down the line, I was on the city council. president of Sportsman Club. You know, they had me kind of doing a lot of things. And I enjoyed it. I liked it because the town really accepted me and took me in, and the fire department was like a family instantly. Something we didn't do on the fire department, though, back then was auto extrication. We'd go on the fire calls, we'd go on the car accidents, but then we'd wait for Detroit Lakes to show up with the jaws of life. And there's something called the golden hour. That's where we have an hour to get somebody out of the vehicle or from when they crashed into the hospital within an hour. And that gives them a better chance of survival. So we decided to get the jaws of life. We had a bunch of mechanics on the fire department. We got the jaws of life, we trained, and we started running on calls. And as a firefighter, I told myself, we're going to be seeing stuff, but I didn't cause the accident, so it's not my fault. We're there to make things better. Well, unfortunately, we had a lot of car accidents right after we started going on the runs. We also had the Gumby suits, the ice water rescue suits, to go into ice water. And we also had several of those calls where we lost people. We also lost people in fires. And we had, in like a 2-year span, a lot of fatalities. And it started bothering me. In '98, I opened up a shop in in Frazee. It's called S&T Auto Repair. It was in the old creamery building. And I thought it was going really good. I had a partner. We went into business, and things were looking good. So then we had customers also, so I got to know a lot of people. Something else on these car accidents was it was people we knew. It was local people. It was our kids' friends in the car accidents. It was our neighbors. It was some of the relatives of a firefighter. And it started to hit home a little too much. I started having some nightmares. I started to kind of second guess, as a firefighter, am I doing enough? My shop was conveniently located right across from the liquor store. So I started to go across the street and drink after work. Happy hour at first. Next thing you know, it was 9 o'clock, 11 o'clock, midnight, closing the bar down. I had 2 kids and a girlfriend at home. I was isolating from I didn't want to be around them. I wanted to be around them, but something inside me wouldn't let me be around them. And then when I was around them, I would take out everything that happened in that day, the anger. I would get mad at them for what happened, for what somebody else did. I was taking it out on the 3 people I loved the most. And the thing with the anger is I couldn't stop it. It got worse and worse and worse, and then the fuse got shorter. I was turning into somebody I didn't recognize. This went on. The nightmares got worse. But in 2010, things were looking up. I got a loan to build a brand new shop. This shop was amazing. If you know where Frazee is, it's out at the city limits. The old city limits restaurant, I bought that. Added a big shop on, heated floors, air conditioned, 3 hoists, and lots of room inside. I had it made. It was a shop of my dreams. That was in 2010. The accidents continued all the way up till then and beyond. Something else happened in 2010. Besides being busy with the shop, we also had another car accident, which wasn't too uncommon, but this car accident was in the fall of the year, icy roads. The car went off the road into a pond and rolled upside down, and the person inside died. It was a high school student, an athlete. He was underwater for 10 minutes. We showed up, and this rescue went picture perfect. It was perfect. We got him out, revived him, brought him back to life. They got him to Fargo. We saved a life. I mean, we couldn't believe it. It's like they told us that you got an hour underwater, especially if they're a young individual, and they could live. We could revive them, and they can bring them back, and they can have a normal life. And we had it happen right in front of us. All the other drownings we had, it didn't seem like it mattered anymore because we saved a life. That was our victory. I was counting all the fatalities we had on the fire department and the accident scenes. I wasn't counting the victories. I had a scrapbook of all the accidents where we lost somebody. This individual was in the hospital for about a month, recovering. And then a friend of mine on the fire department came in and said, Scott, he died. He died from a lung infection. I was the one that killed him. That was the day my mind switched. I told myself that I was the one that killed him. I was one of the two in the ice water rescue suits that went into the water. 3 feet of water. We got him out. We broke the window. He was already unseatbelted. And as they were dragging me to shore with him in my arms, I must not have covered his mouth. I must have done something wrong for him to get that lung infection. It was my fault. I told myself that. All the other accidents, it started coming back to me. I was a common denominator. I was on those scenes. It had to be something I was doing wrong. They train us to save lives, and I wasn't saving lives. I was failing. My world turned upside down. The nightmares after that were out of control. I was an assistant chief on the fire department at that time. I moved up the ranks fairly fast. After that, I didn't want to be a firefighter anymore. I didn't even want to live. I was a Jekyll and Hyde. I could be nice person in the world to my customers, and if my girlfriend or my kids were in the other room, I'd go in there and I'd just lose it whenever I was around them. I'd take it out on them, the 3 people I loved the most, and I didn't understand what was going on. I was a monster. I was drinking a lot. I started messing around with some meth. Some of my friends did meth. I figured, well, what the heck, I'll try it. I'll party a little bit more. I told myself, they were business people also, and it wasn't affecting my job, so it's okay. I'll do a little meth just to keep awake and party longer. However, I started to use it so I could work longer hours. I started to use it so I could stay awake from my nightmares. In 2010, after that car accident, I was using a lot of meth, and I was staying down at the shop 24 hours a day. I would go home to prepare meals, pack them up, and bring them back to the shop with me. After 2 years of that, in 2012, my girlfriend had enough. After 18 years, and they weren't all bad, but the last ones, I put her through hell. I was yelling at her. The verbal abuse was out of control. I never physically hurt him, but the verbal abuse was horrible. The things I've told my kids, I can't even repeat the words. So when she left, I had an empty house. She took the kids with. She had every reason to. There was no way I was going to go home anymore. There was no reason other than to prepare meals. My lights were on timers. I thought it was fooling my neighbors. But they knew I was riding my bike back to the shop at night or walking back down to the shop, and I'd have my lights on timers, so they'd turn off at 11 o'clock. I'd leave my car in the driveway. I thought I was fooling people. They just assumed I was busy. Customers would come in during the day, so all I could do was diagnose the vehicles, get the parts, and I'd work all night long. That's what I told people. I went from assistant chief down to a captain, down to a yellow helmet, down not making any fire calls, not making the trainings. I was the negative person on the fire department. We don't need to train for this anymore. This is stupid. Why are we doing this stuff? I was the one making fun of everybody else. For 2 years, I was snorting a line of meth an hour because I was never going to go to sleep again until I was dead. I told myself I wasn't going to live anymore. I knew I was going to be dead. I was buying meth by an ounce, and I had an ounce on backup in my shop all the time. I had picture frames hidden in Christmas light boxes in 3 different locations in my shop, so I could go and do a line in my parts room, in my office, in my utility room. I could have customers in there, and I'd just sneak in the back room, and within 10 seconds, I'd have a line. I had to do one every hour minimum. I was not only lying to myself, but I was cheating everybody around me because I was not seeing my kids anymore. In 2014, in fact, during that time, I also had 322 shells in my pocket, my little pocket. I carried 322 shells that I had pulled the lead off of, cleaned the gunpowder out of them, and I filled them with meth. So if I was on an accident scene or if I was on a call or I couldn't chop a line, that's, make a line to snort, I'd pull a lid off the 22 shell and just like that. On a fire scene. I was running fire scenes high on meth. Not proud of that, but I was an addict. In 2014, after 2 years of staying awake, I went over to my ex-girlfriend's house, her apartment, and my kids were there, and I did the same thing that I did every other time. I got angry at them. Nothing they did, but I took out everything that happened during the day on them. And I left telling them that I'm going to burn the house down with myself in it. It wasn't the first time I told them that. I told them nobody cares about me. I'm just going to end it. I put a guilt on them. I blamed everybody else for what was going on in my life because I didn't know what was going on in my life. In July of 2014, after that, I went back down to my shop, sat down at my desk in my office, reached in the drawer and pulled out my .44 Magnum, put it in my head and pulled the trigger. The hammer came down and clicked on a revolver with no safety. I slammed the gun down, and I was climbing the desk, literally up against the wall behind me. I didn't understand what just happened. I chose that weapon because it was going to be final. I was looking for my body on the floor, on the ground, and I was looking at the gun thinking it was going to spin around and shoot me or it was going to go off and blow my eardrums out. It didn't make any sense. But I sat down at the computer, and my fingers danced across the keyboard. I'm a hunt and peck kind of a typer. This day, man, my fingers danced across the keyboard. It was nightmares, flashbacks, anger, and drugs. Hit enter on a Google search, and there it was. PTSD lit the screen up. There's no way I could have PTSD because I was never in the military. That's what I told myself. I opened up the Mayo site, and there it was, right on top. First responders and veterans, high risk. How could that be? Nobody talked about mental health or PTSD on the fire service. We had one trainer at one time when I was sitting there as an assistant chief. He got done, and the instructor left the front of the room, and on the way out, he said, "Hey, by the way, watch out for PTSD." I didn't even know how to say PTSD. I looked around the room as an assistant chief at the firefighters, at the military guys. These guys are all right. They don't have all this PTSD stuff. I was high on meth when I was looking around that room. I had every symptom, but I didn't know it. Nobody talked about the symptoms. I looked at that Mayo site, and I seen all the symptoms that I had. I also found something else, that there's therapy for it, that there's a way out. It's not a death sentence. It was exciting because I had a name to this monster. I had a way out. I studied PTSD all day and all night. Again, I wasn't sleeping. So the next morning, at 8 o'clock in the morning, I went over to my ex-girlfriend's house, knocked on the door. She opened it up a little bit. This time I barged in, pushed the door open. I've got PTSD. I found it. I'm not crazy. I've got PTSD. She was backing down the hallway with our two sons behind her. And our two sons were looking from behind her at me, scared of me, like I'd lost it. See, when I was so excited that I found the answer, it also looked a lot like those days that I was that monster. I left there thinking I was never going to be trusted by them again. I blew it. All these second chances that I got, I blew it. Went back down to the shop, had to walk around the end of that desk, and the gun was still laying there, and all the rounds were still laying there. None of the rounds had a dimple on them, on the primer. None of them were hit. I didn't understand. I thought there was a mistake somewhere, that I was supposed to be dead. I pulled out a list of phone numbers I'd collected over the years. The first one was to a suicide hotline. Back in July of 2014, I called a suicide hotline 12 times, and nobody answered. I called another 3 hotlines set up for first responders that my chief gave me five years earlier. Finally, I got around to calling them after a suicide attempt. I called those 3 numbers, and they were no longer in service, disconnected. That was 15 phone calls. I had 3 phone numbers left on my list. So I went to the next one, and it was a friend of mine. He was in law enforcement. I called him up. He answered. I said, man, I tried to kill myself. I've got PTSD. Can you come out and talk with me? Can you come out and help me understand what is going on? Can you go talk to my ex-girlfriend, talk to her about PTSD, tell her I'm not this monster and that I can get some help? He told me he was going to come pick me up and take me to the hospital. That's what they're trained. I mean, it's gotten better, but they're not psychiatrists. We can't expect that of them. I told him I've got 2 more phone numbers. And I said, if they don't work, then I'll call you back. You can come get me. I hung the phone up, went out in my shop, set my acetylene tanks and propane tanks up in my shop, went back to my office, loaded up my SKS rifle, and sat at the desk where I could see the tanks. I had surveillance cameras inside and outside my shop. I had motion detectors all over on the outside of my shop. I was waiting for him to come get me, and I was going to blow myself up and take myself out because I wasn't going to go to the funny farm, what I thought. That's all I could think. They're going to lock me up. They're going to cage me like an animal. Can you just listen? Can you help me without doing that? Can you treat me like this friend I was yesterday when we were talking? I'm the same person. Thankfully, he didn't drive by. He didn't come out. He heard the desperation in my voice, and he gave me some space. Thankfully, another police car didn't drive by because I was prepared to blow that shop up. Not to hurt anybody else, but I wasn't going to go get locked up and treated like an animal. After a while, I made another phone call. This time, it was a phone number that was on our fire station. It was in blue marker on the left upper corner of our whiteboard, and it was a therapist we were supposed to call if we had any issues. I made the phone call. She answered, and I told her I'd tried to kill myself. I said, I think I've got PTSD. I need to talk with somebody. She set me up with an appointment for a week and a half out after I just told her I tried to kill myself. I made the appointment, hung the phone up, and I remember looking at the screen, the monitor, and seeing the blue sky outside. And I remember telling myself I'm not going to see another sunset. I got one last phone number. The gun was laying there. I've got 2 minutes left of life because this number is going to fail just like the rest of them did. Nobody cares. I called that last phone number. It was a national hotline for first responders. It rang twice. And when the guy answered, I was screaming into the phone, I'm going to kill myself. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. Nobody wants to listen. Nobody gets this. It was a captain in a large fire station out on the East Coast. And he said, Scott, we've got you. We're going to get through this together. And it was like he reached through the phone and picked me up into his hands. He was there. He was listening. I talked to him for a very long time, and I spilled out everything. He understood PTSD. He understood the fire service. He understood alcoholism. I didn't tell him about the meth, but he listened. He gave me a phone number for a police chief in Chicago and a fire chief in New York. I had 3 resources I could call them, and they stopped everything just to listen, just to be there for me. It felt good that somebody was listening, somebody understood what I was going through as a firefighter. They also told me something about EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, EMDR. They told me that it's a treatment or a therapy that they put a light bar in front of you or your fingers, and they got vibrating pads on your legs, and you'll go in there and you'll talk and you'll feel better. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, this sounds a little weird. But they gave me a phone number for the Village in Fargo. So I made the call, and I got the appointment for the very next morning at 8 o'clock to start this EMDR therapy. So there I went, Google searching again. What is this EMDR stuff? Got looking into it, and oh man, this stuff's witchcraft, man. There's no way they're going to put their fingers out here and do this and that. And I'm going to be feeling good. Yeah, they're going to hypnotize me. I'm going to be clucking like a chicken. They're going to videotape it. It's going to get out. I wasn't so sure about this stuff. But just by them listening and being there for me, I had a different route to go down, a different path. So I made it to that appointment the very next morning. We talked. I did what I did for a long time. I blamed everything on a woman. I blamed it on somebody else. I was so cold and numb, and I couldn't love anybody. My world sucked around me. It was so negative. So the first 2 sessions, that's all we did. We tried to figure out what was going on, what was creating this person that I became. And then the 3rd session came, and they were going to do this EMDR with this light bar. I was scared to death. I pulled into the village parking lot, parked my car, and I did what I did all the time, what I had to do to live. I did 3 huge lines of meth in the parking lot because I couldn't live without meth back then. I went in and we started this process. This light bar came out and we started talking. I started telling them, I started trying to figure out which girl was it. You know, it had to be a woman. You blame everything on women, at least I did. All of a sudden the car accidents came out. Holy buckets, where'd this stuff come from? See, we never debriefed after the calls. We'd put the truck away and put it all, go back home. So my mind captured all that and wasn't releasing it. So we were talking about the car accidents. Finally, I was letting it out. My life before I went into that room was like this.
Did everything right, you still die. In the end, they always die. This isn't fair. I screwed up somewhere. Quit thinking about it and quit thinking about it. Why are you doing this to me, God? Why am I this messed up? I'm always seeing this. Can't stop this. I can't do this anymore. I screwed up. Should I just end it?
Are you okay, Dad?
This isn't fair.
Something like that happened to me after one of the car accidents. I went home after putting the vehicle away, the truck, getting it ready for the next call. My son hit me in the chest with a baseball, wanted to play catch, and he brought me out of the funk I was in. I don't remember driving home. I don't even remember putting the trucks away. But when that ball made physical contact with me, it pulled me out of this funk I was in. The crosses along the side of the road haunted me. There was a cross on every road leaving Frazee. We lost people, the house fires. It all was stuck in here, and it was an infection. I couldn't handle anymore. My brain couldn't handle anymore. So when I did that EMDR therapy, wow. If you've ever seen the movie The Green Mile, where the guy's got the bugs coming out of his mouth, that's what it felt like. All that darkness was coming out. I was talking about the car accidents. And when I talked about them, I heard myself going through these car accidents, and all of a sudden it's like, you know what? I did everything I could. I wasn't killing these people. I was trained to do what I did, and I did it. And it was out of my hands what happened after that. I went back to, I wasn't creating these car accidents. I was doing my best. I felt like I lost 100 pounds that day. I felt like I had a trench coat on that was covered in dry tar. It was heavy and crispy and crunchy and just horrible. And it felt like I left it there. I felt like I was 18 years old again. On my way home from Fargo that day in August of 2014, there was this sunflower field on the side of the road by Clinton. I couldn't believe it. Great big yellow sunflower heads. I had to stop and walk through the field. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I could hear the birds. I could see the white puffy clouds. It was different. And that's where the title of my program came from, Seeing in Color Again. I could see colors. Before that, my world was so dark and gray and shadows all over the place. I could tell you what color something was, but now all of a sudden it was neon. It was just bright, and that sunflower field was like a high. That week was a very difficult week because I'd opened myself up to therapy, and I'd opened myself up to feeling again. And I was feeling things for the first time. I was tasting food again. I was watching squirrels in the yard or in the trees. I never paid attention to the world around me until then. I was able to absorb more and let it in. It was a long week. I even wrote letters to my sons telling them to stay away because I had some demons I had to deal with. See that? Those 3 lines of meth that I did in the village parking lot were the last 3 lines I ever done. Back in 2014, I walked away from meth, an addiction, a line an hour. I walked away from it all by myself because I dealt with my mental health. I was working on it. I could sleep again without having a nightmare. I was all over the place for that first week, but I did 6 sessions of EMDR over the month. And I felt so young and healthy, and I felt amazing. And then one day I was sitting in my driveway with my 2 sons, and there was a picnic table in the yard. See, when I was younger, when I was 18 years old, down in the city park, they had picnic tables. And I used to jump over picnic tables, hurdle them in my cowboy boots, showing off to the girls, whatever it was. So here's this picnic table in the yard. I'm 46 years old. I told my sons, I said, you got to watch this. I took a run at that picnic table, and I tried to jump it. I almost made it. I came down pretty hard, thought I broke my leg, thought I broke my ankle. Kids thought it was really wild. The worst part about it, all the neighbors were outside watching me do this. So for 2 weeks, I stretched out. That picnic table was my yard. I didn't like it. 2 weeks later, I took another run at it. I never said I was smart. I took a run at it, and I made it. I jumped a picnic table at 46 years old. And as I stood there looking around to see if any of my neighbors were out, no. Nobody, not even a dog. I mean, come on. Where was all these cameras back then that my neighbors have now? With that picnic table and I sat and spent lots of hours laying on top of that picnic table and looking up at the trees. It was part of my therapy too. I learned coping skills. I learned things that worked for me. I got my smile back. After my suicide attempt, I told the fire department, I told them I couldn't be on the fire department anymore. I told them about the suicide attempt, and I had PTSD. I said, I'm going to take a leave of absence, and I'm not sure if I'm coming back. When I made that announcement at the meeting, it was deathly quiet in there. I could see the teardrops of the firefighter who was sitting next to me hit the agenda, the piece of paper in front of him. I asked him not to leave me alone, that I'm still here. I'm still the same person. It's just I've got a diagnosis now. But I'm the same person I was back then. So take me out fishing. Let's go have a beer. Let's just hang out. Just don't abandon me. Unfortunately, we didn't talk about PTSD back then. And they didn't know how to be around me without triggering me. They were so scared they were going to trigger me that they kind of stood off in the distance. In fact, a couple firefighters came in. They did come into my shop and said, Scott, we should have seen this. Because it was that car accident. You showed up as assistant chief in my own vehicle. And I told the firefighters, I said, stay back. You don't need to see this one. I'll take care of this one. I'm already damaged. And they were wondering what I meant by that. Again, we didn't have any education. We didn't have a fighting chance back then. It's changed now. I'm proud of our fire department in Frazee because they're doing debriefings and they're talking about mental health. And I absolutely love it. Later on, It was about November of 2014. I was shopping in Fargo with my son, my younger son. He was 13 at the time. And I remember he knew everything right from the get-go. I mean, he knew about the suicide attempt, and he knew when I walked away from meth, I told him about the meth, and he was actually, I was trying to push my kids away from me because I knew I was going to be dead, so I didn't want to hurt them anymore, and I was going to hurt them. It sounds weird, but I felt like I was a burden to them. I had $1 million life insurance policy I was going to leave to them, thinking they could replace me with money. But that day in Fargo, I looked over at my son and I said, I'm really glad the gun didn't go off. And my son looked at me and said, Dad, the gun did go off. It killed the bad dad. After that therapy, the meth, the cravings for meth were gone. The suicidal thoughts were gone. The anger was gone. The nightmares were gone. I made a recovery. I wasn't going to go back to where I was. There was another part of my recovery where I was driving by the Bethlehem Lutheran Church in Frazee. And it was the church my ex-girlfriend used to go to. So one day I'm driving by and all of a sudden my car had a mind of its own. I did a U-turn, parked in front of the church. It was weird, but I got out of the car, walked in, asked to talk to the pastor. And he made time for me. He listened. He was there. I cried so many tears trying to figure out who is this person that I've become. I'm not angry anymore. People try to get me angry, but they can't. I sit there and smile at them. Where does smile come from? Where do these colors come from? Where does feeling in my chest come from? Because, man, something inside me feels really, really good. And it's like a high, a natural high all the time. And he looked at me and said, Scott, that's the Holy Spirit. Until then, I didn't understand what the Holy Spirit was. I understood Jesus and God, but the Holy Spirit part I never did understand until I felt it. And tell you what, nobody's going to take it from me. This is here for good, and I get to share it with others. A while after that, I was dropping my son off at the school, and we had a Main Street fire when I wasn't on my leave of absence, and they had a truck there. So I went over the hill and from the school and stopped, and I said, guys, can I hand tools out? Can I pull the hose for you? I know I'm going to leave, but you guys are really short-handed. Let me help, do whatever. The next truck came in with my gear on it, my bunker pants, my jacket. And the guys came up to me and said, man, Scott, you're looking great. Welcome back. I was back. I had the smile back. I had the energy back. It felt good to be alive. Reaching out for therapy was the best thing I ever did. I wish I would have done it earlier before it led up to what it did. There was times prior to that I would get upset. And I didn't really notice this stuff, but my friends did. When we're out shooting pool or something, they're like, why are you such a jerk to these girls? They didn't do anything to you. They were nice to you, and all of a sudden you just kind of snubbed them and stopped talking to them and walked away from them. Well, we used to have a bartender in town. She was young, 19-ish, and she was full of energy, bubbly. And when I had all these bad days back then, I'd go to the bar, and she'd always have me smiling before I got my first beer. It was just something about her that just made me feel really good. And then one day she had a little tennis shoe necklace on. And I asked her where she got it because I was going to buy it from my girlfriend at the time. And she told me. So the next morning I was going to go buy this tennis shoe necklace for my girlfriend at the time. 6 o'clock in the morning, the pager went off. Get out of bed, car accident. It was a ways out of town. The vehicle got between a fifth wheel trailer and a dually pickup, and it destroyed the car. Killed the occupant. So before we start cutting on the car, we always disconnect the battery. So I lifted the hood and went to cut the battery cables. And there laid the necklace. It was her. It shook me up. Prior to that, one of my friends told me, he said, you don't want to go on this one. You know this person. And I pushed him out of the way, and I said, I have to. It's my job. Don't tell me who it is. Me and another guy removed her body. And after I went through therapy and talked about some stuff, everything started to make sense. That's why I was getting angry with girls. They had necklaces on, and it was a trigger. It made sense. It made the connection, and I could work through it. I could use my coping skills. Identifying triggers is huge. I used to be allergic to coffee. I could not have coffee or be in a room with coffee because I'd get sick to my stomach. My kids used to laugh at me because we'd go grocery shopping, and I'd beeline it through the coffee aisle, holding my breath, because it would make me nauseous. So one of my therapists came in, we were talking about this. It's like, you can't have that in here. I'm going to get sick and throw up. And she went and talked to a doctor in the next session. She goes, this doesn't make any sense. You wouldn't have that kind of reaction if you're allergic to it. So we talked about it. My mom used to drink a lot of coffee, and we used to go on a lot of car trips. I used to get car sick. So when I smelled coffee, my mind would tell me I'm car sick. And once I worked through that, I don't like coffee. I think it tastes like dirty water. But I'm working on it. My fiance is trying to get me to drink more coffee in the morning, but I'll do the cappuccino. But it's weird how when you identify what's setting you off, you can start taking control of it again. It feels good. Something else happened. I'm going to show you some pictures here, though, that some of you might recognize. There's before and after. I was so much younger, but there's no color in those eyes. They're dark. I was physically healthier, but inside my mind, I was not in a good place. The one on the right, wow, that's a smile. I mean, the twinkle in my eyes, shining in my eyes, whatever it was. I mean, I felt really, really good, and still do. There is one side effect, though. Walking away from meth the way I did and all this other stuff and seeing colors again is food really tastes good. So, I mean, I gained a little weight, which I'm good with. I'm always constantly working on losing or not eating as much, but man, food tastes good. I was cooking for my whole neighborhood after I went through my therapy. It was great. But I found new hobbies. So in 2015, I heard about these service dogs. And I said, man, it would really be nice to have a service dog just to get me out and socialize a little bit more, because my life was changing. I found out I couldn't twist wrenches and be a mechanic anymore. I was trying so hard to be a mechanic, but every time I worked on cars, man, it didn't go too good. So I went and talked to this trainer, and they said they were going to get me a service dog, $1,000 silver lab, and they were just having it bred, and I was going to get the pick of the litter. Silver labs are beautiful. Not only that, but you can go hunting with them, and I wanted to get back into hunting. So, that lab sounded ideal. This couple that was training me mainly trained German Shepherds. So one day, I was out there looking at these German Shepherd, the police dogs. Firefighters don't want no dang police dog. But I'm standing out there and I'm watching them, and I had my younger son with me. And there was this German Shepherd that was rescued and brought to him, and he was underneath a vehicle. And he didn't come out for several days. They'd set food down and watered. When they weren't around, he'd come out and eat and drink, but he didn't want to be around people. We don't know what he went through in his life. We know a little bit, but. So as I'm off looking at these German Shepherds being trained, my son sits down next to this car. And I looked back, and this dog sat on my son's lap. I don't want no German Shepherd. I want a lab. I went back, and the look on my son's face was either I'm bringing Sarge with, or my son's staying there. So the decision was already made. And if you look at this dog in the lower right corner, that's mule deer. That's got to be a cross with mule deer. That's no purebred by no means. The middle picture was right after his first bath. He was covered in tree sap. Oh man, the love in them eyes, right from the get-go. He loved us, and we loved him. And that's the thing, is I could start loving. Puppies also come with a thing where you have to have patience and can't get angry. So he helped me with my patience. He helped me with my anger. He also grew up. I was going to give him up because at this time I was starting to do a lot of speaking in 2016. I was all around the country speaking. And I was putting Sarge in kennels and having people watch him, for 2 weeks at a time. And I felt like this isn't fair for him. So I put the word out in the fire department that I was looking for somebody to adopt him. And they knew that that wasn't a good choice for me. They put the word out. The couple that was supposed to train him as a service dog, they got a divorce, and I got him trained, but he wasn't certified. He was really well trained. And they put the word out, and they got a hold of Patriot Assistance dogs right here in Detroit Lakes, and Linda out there had us come in, and we went through their program, and they certified us. And he's a service dog now. We're a team. He helps me when I go out and talk with people one-on-one. They can love up on Sarge. Because when people are in crisis, I learned the hard way that, when they're talking to you and you're giving them love, you give them a hug or whatever, and, there's got to be boundaries there. And Sarge is my boundary maker. They pull on his ears. Look at those ears. I wanted to call him Radar. But he's amazing. The year before they had the Ice Palace down here at the pavilion, Sarge pulled me to a gal that was going to take her life behind the pavilion in the snow. February 13th, the day before Valentine's Day. He saved a life. He drugged me through the snow to get to her. She was out of sight, couldn't see her, but he sensed it, and he pulled me to her. It was amazing how he can sense stuff. He's designed to pick up on anxiety and depression. He's trained very well. Used to be. He's a little more spoiled now. I don't need him, like I did back then. You don't see him here beside me. In fact, he can't be in a room when I'm talking like this because he's designed to keep me from going back to that. But he's got a command to pee and to poop. He's trained. So one day, the Capri Motel was going to be tore down to make room for the new hotel. So I came to town, and I was, Sarge got me out walking down the beach all the time. It was awesome. It felt so good to get out and be around people. This day I went and bought some brand new white tennis shoes. The New Balance, the daddy shoes. Brand new tennis shoes. Went and took Sarge for his walk. He did his business. Got back to the motel, pulled my phone out, and I was taking pictures of the Capri Motel before they tore it down. All of a sudden, people started honking at me and waving at me, and I'm looking, what's going on here? Right on Main Street, and people are honking at me. I'm like, I haven't lived here for a while. I looked down, and Sarge was pooping on my brand new white tennis shoes. How does that happen? I laughed. I laughed about it. Before I would have kicked a dog. I would have never had a dog. I couldn't believe the anger was gone. I never had a pet, but I did have a pet rock one time. And I guess you're not supposed to take them swimming. But, part of life's lessons, I guess. But after he pooped on my shoe, and I literally shook it off, I walked up to the dumpster, and there was a brand new roll of toilet paper still wrapped on top of the dumpster. And I had to look up and say, man, I don't know who I was talking to exactly. I think I was telling my dad, man, I made it. 'Cause my dad had passed by, a long time ago, but it felt good to have the change in my life, to have patience. The skills were working. I didn't have all this stuff inside me. So I got back on the fire department, and I was still able to go to the car accidents because I wasn't letting them build up inside my mind. Other firefighters in the area were reaching out to me, wanting me to talk. I spoke at a lot of fire stations around here. I couldn't shut up about it. I don't know what it was. I just can't shut up about what I went through because I don't want anybody to go there. Suicide's not the answer. If you're seeing these signs of isolation in yourself or somebody else, the changes. My ex-girlfriend went to the fire department, talked to a lot of the firefighters and a lot of their significant others, and said, Scott's changing. He's yelling at us behind closed doors. And they wrote it all off. It's like, man, he's got this new shop and he's busy all the time. He's just under a lot of stress. It was more than that. This was way beyond stress. I pushed him away because I knew I was going to eventually die by my own hand. So going around the country speaking, for whatever reason, I kept finding myself in the right place at the right time. I was interfering with suicides. When I talked in front of, I was in New York and at these big places talking to 500 firefighters at a time. They were reaching out to me and talking to me about what they had in mind. I was at this one where it was about 500, 600 people, firefighters in the audience. And I didn't even notice it. It was a big place. And I got off the stage and the one of the directors said, hey, watch out for this guy. He took off. He didn't mean what he said. And he was yelling at me, calling me every name in the book. I didn't hear him. They said, watch out for this guy. He's suicidal. He's going to kill himself probably within the next year or so. And it's like, okay, what are you guys doing about this? You guys know this and you're not doing anything? Come on. Later that evening, I was walking down the hallway on my way to the room that all the firefighters meet in. We have some drinks and shoot the breeze, and all of a sudden this guy came out of nowhere, grabbed me, pulled me into the side room. It was that guy. I was scared to death. I thought I was going to get my butt kicked. Instead, he crumbled on the floor, and he said, Scott, we need to talk. He went to that conference to say goodbye to everybody. And something when I was talking hit way too close to home. It triggered him. It pissed him off. I was telling his story. He left that evening to go to start therapy and treatment at a facility out on the East Coast. And he's alive today, still a firefighter, still a chief. He made a complete switch. Another firefighter I kept in contact with, I met right away. He was a big city firefighter, and he was at this really bad event years ago. And he called me up, this was a few years ago. He called me up and he said, Scott, where am I going to find a good woman? I'm going through another divorce. And it was like his third or fourth or fifth, I don't know what it was, but it was a lot. And I said, buddy, I don't think it's the women. And he chuckled and he laughed, and he goes, I knew you were going to say that. He called back about 6 months later and said, man, that EMDR stuff's awesome. He says, it works. I went through it. I did it. You know what? All my ex-girlfriends are really nice women. I'm not sure how that ended up, but I'm guessing he got together with one of them for sure. But, man, talk about some issues there. He probably had to go to therapy for that. My poor therapist, I let things out. And, he wasn't a specialized therapist for first responders, which they're working on getting a lot more of because we do see a lot of different things. Veterans, first responders. And it's nice to have somebody that understands what we're going through, that can connect with us. And there's a shortage of those that, either they're booked out too far, but we need crisis therapists for first responders all the way around the world. I did a lot of interviews with people, newspapers and so on. And one day I was online and I was looking up firefighter suicide, and I came across this article that was written in Japanese or Chinese or whatever it was. And there was my name. It was all Japanese, and then there's Scott Geiselhart in English. I'm like, what's this? Well, the Associated Press did an article about what I went through, and it went all the way around the world. I've had people reach out to me and FaceTime me with translators. It doesn't matter what language you speak. It Doesn't matter what background you have, your sex, what you do for a living, PTSD, it can strike at any time. I can get in a car accident on the way home tonight and end up with PTSD again. I know the signs and symptoms, but it's possible. But I'm more aware of it now, and I'm going to reach out for help a heck of a lot faster than I did last time, because there was so much time I wasted away from my kids. This dog, kind of a babe magnet, I think, but when I used to walk him down on the beach, I'm not kidding you, people would stop and pet Sarge. They had no idea there was somebody on the end of the leash. I mean, oh, look at the big ears, and they'd pet him and was like, hello, my name's Scott, you know. But I didn't use him to get a woman. Did it all on my own. I met her at a fireman's dance, a Detroit Lakes fireman's dance down here at the lakeside. What a difference in relationships. Open communication, we talk about things. If I'm going through something, she calls me out on it, and I like it. I mean, I get calls, like I say, a lot of calls, a lot of times they're suicidal, and we work through it. I help them, but I absorb some of it sometimes, and some days or 2 days or 3 days, doesn't matter what I'm doing. I could be out on the pontoon, but it still hurts. She'll pick up on that. I have safety plans. People that I'm going to call when I start recognizing that stuff. And when she says, hey, Scott, maybe it's time for a phone call to one of those people. Yeah, I got to make that phone call. Sometimes I put it off, though. And all of a sudden, that person I was supposed to call calls me. Michelle makes the phone call. And that person chews me out. It's like, we have a deal. Why is Michelle calling me? You're supposed to push that green button. But to have that safety net and that support between Sarge and Michelle, wow. It's just such a different life. We both lost our moms about 1.5 years ago during COVID. We went through a lot. My brother was on his deathbed and survived. We had to find a new place for her brother to live. We had a lot going on. Next thing you know, we started pushing each other away. We were stressed. We were going through a lot. But one night we called it, enough is enough. It was on a Friday. We had a bottle of wine, cranked up the music, and we danced, just us. Nothing else around us. It was just about us that night. We made time for each other. It's a night I'll never forget. I mean, it was so much fun. You know, when they talk about date nights, that's important. Don't push the loved ones out like I was. The signs and symptoms were there, but I didn't recognize them because I didn't have an education about it. Remember that car accident I talked about where that individual went off the road, the one that put me over the top? It was in the dark, ice water. Vehicle went upside down. We're assuming one of the windows busted out immediately, so he had one breath of air. He got unseatbelted. Didn't have much of a chance. I doubt that he even knew the vehicle was upside down. Ice cold, and the confusion he was going through. 3 feet of water. The bottom of the vehicle was out of the water. If he would have only known that possibly there was an air pocket on the bottom of that car, possibly by the feet, by the floor. What if there was an air pocket there and he could have got to that air pocket? He could have survived. We don't know for sure. I'm just saying, what if? I'm talking about that air pocket. That's what I'm doing here about PTSD and suicide. Reach out for help. Talk with somebody about it. Suicide's permanent and it hurts a lot of people. It leaves a big hole in this world. You are worth it. You will be missed. There's other ways out. I'm going to be here till the last person leaves. If you guys have any questions, one-on-one you want to ask. I do talk about post-traumatic success, and that's what I want to focus on, not the suicide attempt, but the success. I went down a bad road and I recovered. PTSD is not a life or death sentence, doesn't need to be. We can recover. There's lots of help out there. Just got to reach out and get it. Here's my information if you want to take pictures of it. I take phone calls. I do this full time. I'm going to be speaking in Fargo tomorrow at the Dakota Medical Foundation at 2 o'clock, and then again on the 30th, I'll be speaking at Dakota Medical Foundation at 6:30. I go into schools and talk. Yesterday I was at a realtors conference and spoke. We all have mental health. Thank you. So, oh my gosh. It's so different. Now they call with the big decisions in their life, and we talk our way through it. They lost their grandma the same time Michelle and I lost her mom. And my two sons were two of the first on scene before the fire department even got there. And they didn't find her body till later, but my two sons, both of them reached out and said, you know what, Dad, we both went to therapy. We both talked about this because we've seen what happened if you don't. Now they're helping other people. You know, for me to be able to help people, and then it's like a ripple effect, a chain of events that they go off and help others. And that's what we need. We need to be open, and we need to talk about mental health. So it's okay to talk about it. Cancer was taboo back in the 50s. You know, people thought you could get cancer by shaking somebody's hand. Same with mental health. We just got to be more open about it and talk about it. Recovery is very possible. Addiction, same thing. Yes. Oh, definitely. Sexual abuse. A kid can see their mom getting beat or their dad getting beat or something bad, or they can involve them in injury. A lot of times if you get a physical injury, that, you know, can also lead to PTSD. Yeah, it's more than just, that's what kind of angered me, that how can I be a first responder? Nobody talked about this stuff. I mean, I thought it was just a military thing. Yes. Yeah, nobody's immune to it. Like I said earlier, I could leave and get in a car accident, and it could really get, to where it sticks in there. And that's what's so awesome about that therapy I did. I meditate a lot. I process things now. Just a while back, it's weird because on the way back from the East Coast, I drove 22 hours straight through. And I should know better than that. Because when you sleep, you go through the REM mode of sleep when you're dreaming. That's your brain processing things that happen during the day. And if you eliminate the sleep part, or you're not getting good sleep, your brain's not allowed to do that. So that's part of it. But yeah, a natural disaster, a tornado, hurricane, whatever, financial situations even. I mean, a divorce. But again, there's therapy out there. Yeah. About a month. Mine went really quick. But again, I wanted it out, man. This infection was coming out. This isn't part of my body anymore. I just wanted it all done with. I mean, there was no other direction I could go because I wasn't going to go that suicide route anymore. I realized that I was going to hurt a lot of people. Can't buy my kids a dad. $1 million probably would have done more damage to them than, and now for them to be able to recognize the lessons of what I went through, and now they're picking it up and helping others and helping themselves so they don't get to the point I was. It feels good. I mean, a clean slate. Imagine having a clean slate in life, and that's basically what I had. I wish I could work on cars, but I can't. And I've had a few people say, man, you used to cut people out of cars with the jaws of life. Now you're standing up in front of people and helping them get through life with your jaws. And it's like, that's a different way of looking at it. Any other questions? Yes. Thanks. And I'll be around again, so I'll stick around till somebody asks, or till the last person goes. And if you have any events that you're looking for somebody to come talk about suicide, I'm open to it. I went through a bad time in my life, but again, I'm not going to forget that and let somebody else go through that. Thanks.
All right. Thanks again, Scott. Thank you again, everyone, for attending tonight. And like Scott said, we'll be here until the last person leaves. So have a good night.